All right, y'all about ready to begin? We're going to stay on schedule this afternoon, unlike this morning. We got any more stragglers? There's plenty of seating up front if anybody's coming in. Y'all might, they've asked us to ask people to kind of scoot towards the center so if people do file in, they have a place to come in and sit without actually having to step across you. If there's room, if you don't mind just scooting in a little bit and making some seats on the edge available for any late comers, that would be very helpful. We still have some folks filing in. Just to double check where you are. This is, we're calling it Apex 101. It's Introduction to Force.com Pages and Force.com Code, also known as Visualforce and Apex. If you are not intending to be in this course, you might want to check your schedule and try a different room, but make sure everybody's in the right place. Introductions. This is Shannon Schupak. And I'm Paul Underbrink. We're both sales engineers, and we're here today to kind of give you all the introduction to some of the programmatic aspects. So we anticipate that this particular audience is going to have a lot of familiarity. You should be well versed with the application, but maybe not necessarily having tried the code elements or the programmatic aspects of the application. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and continue. You've probably seen this about 5 times today, and we're guessing you probably got it mostly memorized, but just in case, I'm going to give you another chance. Those of you who want to spend some more time on it, of course, you probably can find it in the next session, and we'll continue to look at this particular slide. Everything we're going to talk to you about today is in the application, so not a lot of features in this particular course. We do have some goals for the particular session that we're in. And really it's about helping you to understand how you can use these features, Force.com pages, Force.com code, in the application. We're not necessarily going to teach you how to code. We'll show you code. And after the session, we're going to make the code that we've shown you available. You'll be able to download it from our Dreamforce portal. So you're going to get a good chance to see this. And we're going to show you a real-world example. So this is not theoretical code. It actually is working code that solves a real-world problem. So we're going to walk through that. And we're going to talk through, as we go through that, why you would choose this versus the traditional approaches that have been available to us for a long, long time. So we're going to go through specifically. There's a lot more that we could show you, but due to the time constraints, we're going to show you Visualforce email templates. We're going to show you how to do custom web pages and host that on sites. And we're also going to show you how you can run batch jobs to process your data all on our platform. And then finally, we're going to show you how you can manage that and deploy that using Sandbox. And as we go through that, we'll also talk about some of the differences in that functionality between the various editions. Obviously, you get a lot more if you're on Unlimited than if you're on Group Edition. So we're going to talk specifically about what functionality you have with those various editions. And we'll finish up with some just further resources and more information. Y'all come on in. There's plenty of seating up front. Please come forward and have a seat. We're happy to have you. So let's begin. And for those of you who are just walking in, this is intro to basically, we'll call it Apex 101. And we're going to walk through a specific scenario. And the idea is, let's take something that you would recognize. So everybody came to Dreamforce and you all registered, and guess what? We used our application to manage that process. How many of y'all have actually worked for a company that holds an event similar to Dreamforce? You see a show of hands? So quite a few. How many of you have actually used Salesforce to track the attendance and the registrations? So a much smaller number. How easy is that to do for those of you who've done it? Kind of challenging, isn't it? Because there's a lot of things that the native application in the past didn't handle very well. You had to use other tools to facilitate the registration process. So we're going to show you some things that we can do with the Salesforce application with the added features of Visualforce Pages and Visualforce Code to handle things like dynamic emails that go out. Also, we're going to show you how you can host your registration website on sites through the application. And run some batch jobs to do some data cleansing and process the survey results. And of course, to do it all within Salesforce and not have to use any outside tools or third-party products. Okay? So let's begin. let's look at our first use case. So the idea is something along the lines of this session. I want to fill up this session. I've got some empty seats here, but ideally I'd like to not have that. You've probably seen, you go to an airplane, you buy an airplane ticket, they've got only so many seats left at a certain time. We'd like to maybe do something like that with our registration templates. We want to drive attendance and fill up the entire session. So we want to dynamically change what's displayed in that email template based on how people are using it and what they're seeing in the template at a particular time. We want to drive that based on data that's in the application. Now, in the old world, you can build HTML templates in the application. So we understand the limitations of that is I can simply plug in merge field values and I can get a particular layout. What we'd like, though, is to have something completely different. I want to change the actual content and makeup of that template dynamically and have that logic be contained within the template. And so we really want to do that. Shannon, how easy is that for us to do with Visualforce?
Well, I mean, you could always go to AppExchange and find a partner that does mass mails, drip marketing. But if all you want is something that's dynamic, and in our example, our requirement is that once the seats for the event start to run out, we want the email template to kind of show conditionally, based on how many seats are left, we want to fill the room, so we kind of want to show conditionally a message indicating the status of the attendance. And so if you see the arrow in the bottom right-hand corner, that type of conditional logic is actually something you can do in a Visualforce email template. And if you've built an HTML email template, you actually are 90% there. The difference in Visualforce, most of it is HTML again, and I'm going to show you some example of where you can add a little bit of conditional logic and also grab images from your website, other components that you can reuse and not have to rebuild for every campaign or event that you have.
Okay, well, let's see that. Let's pull up some code and let's look at the code.
So if you see here, this is a campaign, and we've added some fields to it. We've added a couple of custom fields. So if you can see, there's a session details section. There's an event time. There's a seating capacity. And there's also a roll-up summary field called seats available that basically just rolls up as people say that they're going to attend. It just rolls up those campaign members. It's just a roll-up summary field. And then there's also another field called seats threshold. It's basically that conditional logic about when we want to start indicating in the email that, hey, the event is running out of seats, sign up now, sign up soon. So in Visualforce email template is really not that much different than an HTML template. So if I go to this other tab, I've already clicked on a task below the campaign to send an email. So at this point, I'm going to select a template. And this is a screen you're probably already familiar with. But if I select a template here, this template that I've created is not an HTML template, it's a Visualforce template. And if I select it, scroll down below, you'll see a conditional message here saying, only 9 seats left, register now. The way that this logic is driven is based on the campaign. If we go back to the campaign, and let's change our threshold so that it should no longer show that message. Let's say now that the threshold should be 15. So if we change this to 15, and I'll save this. Hold on just a second. Thank you. I'm looking at it backwards. So if we change it now all we see is register now, and thanks to the audience. So let's go back, and now let's look at the actual source code for this template and how it works. This template, I have it up in another tab. As you can see, is mostly HTML. So it's just like an HTML email template, except in here I've used some Visualforce tags. one of the tags that I've used is this output panel. This output panel tag has an attribute that I want to use. This attribute is called rendered. Basically, the rendered attribute determines whether or not this section within this output panel tag is rendered or not. So it's just a Boolean value. It evaluates to true or false. And what I've done with that attribute, I've actually used a formula inside that attribute to determine, as you've seen, I had it backwards, whether or not this section is actually rendered. So if the seats available is below the threshold, then this part in this template is going to change to render only, and here we're pulling information from the campaign, the number of seats remaining, seats left.
So that's pretty good, right? Again, it's very basic, but this is a working template. And you get the idea that you can actually then build some pretty complex business logic into a template. That's pretty powerful. So let's continue on to our second use case. What's going to happen when they get that email template? Well, there's going to be a call to action. We're going to drive them to a landing page. And what we'd like to do is have that be a nice, fully branded web page. It's got my look and feel, and I got a form for them to register on. So we want to drive people to this site. Well, I can do that today, right? Everybody's web to lead, or probably heard of it. It's pretty straightforward to do, but the problem with web to lead is several. First of all, it just generates the HTML. You actually have to host that somewhere. And you might have to get your IT involved to publish that web page. And then when you get the lead, it's not going to be necessarily integrated into the campaign that you already built. You have to make sure that there's logic somewhere in there that's going to associate that registration back to an existing contact in your database. And that lead could come in as a duplicate, then you got to find the duplicate and resolve the duplicate. It's kind of a pain. So, Shannon, I'm guessing that with sites, we can fix that problem and maybe have an easier way to do it.
Absolutely. So we don't have to have this logic on a separate infrastructure with an API going in between. We're not limited to just inserting a lead. We can apply our own custom business logic, just like we showed in the email template, so that we can not only insert the lead, but find a contact if a contact exists, or insert the lead and even update the campaign so for that campaign member to show that they're there.
Okay, well, let's see that. I'd like to see that in action. Just to be sure, I don't need this, right?
No, this is not necessary. So, we don't have to have infrastructure that's tied into Salesforce just to do simple campaign registration.
All right, this is what I like to hear.
So again, I'm going to go back to our campaign, and this time what we'll see is I'm going to use sites. So I'm going to use sites and Visualforce, and even though those terms may seem daunting, I'm going to use those to register members to this campaign, this event. And again, it's mostly going to be HTML, but we'll go through the logic behind the scenes so we can see the differences. So I've got a site. And notice that this looks very similar to our Visualforce email template. So I can reuse a lot of the same HTML that I used in my template. And it's not a separate web to lead page for every campaign. Because this is running on an infrastructure, we could have one registration page and pull this information for the campaign that we want to show and make it dynamic. So here I can show this event, but I can reuse this same page for any of the events that we have in the session. So if we walk through this page, we can come in, fill out a form, put in an email address, and hit register. And there's no separate infrastructure that this is running on. There's no separate web server with API calls back to Salesforce. This is all just running on the same cloud infrastructure. And if we go back and refresh this page, we'll say the seats available went to 8, and that the VP of Sanitation is now attending this event. So let's, again, go back behind the scenes and look at how this code works. So this Visualforce page is, again, mostly HTML. And the only difference here is that there's a set of input fields and a form that we've added from our original email template. So these input fields was that little form that you saw where I was filling out a first name, a last name, a title. And what you may be familiar from HTML email templates, this is binding to a contact that I have in an Apex class. So behind this page, there's some custom logic that has an attribute in it called a contact. And as you type this information into this form, the controller and the page are automatically going to update that contact, and I'll show you the logic behind that as well.
So this is basically like a web-to-lead form, right?
It's more powerful than a web-to-lead form, because a web-to-lead form, all it does is insert a lead. It can't tell you if the lead already exists, if the contact already exists, what the lead is for. Are they signing up for a campaign? Are they doing, what are they doing? So here we can do much more than just web-to-lead.
Okay. So where does that happen? Let's see that magic.
So this is a class. It's called Event Signup Controller. And our page, when it submits the form, it calls this register method. So at the beginning of this class, there's a contact. And if you remember the form I was showing, the form was bound to the fields like c.firstname, contact.firstname, contact.lastname. And when that form is submitted, it calls this register method. Now this code part here is something that's maybe a little more sophisticated than what we've shown so far. But the way that this code works, and it's designed however you want it, I'm looking in my contact table to see if I've already seen this email before. Do I already have this person as a contact? If I do, then I'm going to look up that contact, and I'm going to create a campaign member associated with the campaign that I was just displaying in the page. And then I'm going to update a campaign member to say that they've responded. If I haven't seen that contact before, that's in this else section here, I'm going to create a new contact, because we just got a new contact. And then I'm also going to create a new campaign member and set their status to responded. So even though it's code, it's not that difficult, but you can create whatever logic you want. Here we're not having to go through our campaign and our leads and do a dedupe process. I'm looking for dupes as they insert their information.
That's pretty great. So again, like web-to-lead, but a little bit souped up. And again, I didn't have to install that anywhere. That's all running on Salesforce.com.
So that it's all running on our cloud, so all the inherent performance tuning capability, all the high availability, disaster recovery, all that's built in. It's not something that you have to worry about. Fantastic.
Fantastic. Okay, so kind of get a feel for what's involved in this. I would like to, let's take a next step in our little scenario here after the session. So you're all going to be asked to fill out a survey. And we want you to be nice on the survey. But we also need to do some of our work on our end to clean up that data after the session. We want to make sure that the numbers are right. So what we want to do is we want to actually just go out to our system and fix the data. If there's any problems, I want to go fix it. But I don't want to have to pull all the data out, put it into a spreadsheet or into some other database and do all my cleansing in that environment. I just want to fix it in place on Salesforce. And I don't want to have to manually go in and change each and every record. I want to do it all in mass. So how do we do that?
It's not the most publicized feature, but in Winter 10, we released something called Batch Apex. So in the past, if you wanted to run some type of logic over your data, it was difficult to do. You had to extract it, do the logic in an on-premise system with on-premise infrastructure, and then re-update it into Salesforce, again using some update tool like Data Loader or some other tool. Well, with Batch Apex, you can actually traverse all your data, and I'll show you an example. Run whatever type of quality, cleansing, scrubbing logic you want to. We have some ideas about how we want to scrub your session ratings. And then you don't have to export it, import it, no infrastructure. And you can even, in a future release, you'll even be able to schedule this to run on an automatic basis every 30 minutes, every hour, every day.
So I just want to be clear that I understand this. We can fix the data in place without an import and export, and I don't need this, right?
Well, we need something to hold the bookshelf down.
Oh, well, okay.
But we don't need it for this data scrubbing.
Well, that's museum quality stuff there. I don't know what we're going to do with that without, all these other tools. Okay, well, show me the code.
So here we have a report, and notice I'm also in Sandbox. So this part here that I'm going to show you, we're also going to show you how you can deploy it to our production environment. But in our Sandbox, we've got some test data, and we have a custom object called session rating. And this report is basically going through all the instances of the session rating and kind of giving the average values. 5 is good, 1 is bad. And in our report, we have the ratings for the average overall experience, the presenters, etc. Well, what we want to do is be able to try to traverse that data and maybe normalize it.
Normalize it.
Maybe you'll take out outliers, whatever. But in order to do that, we need the ability to run custom logic on it in the cloud.
Yes, we got about, 300 or 400 people in this session, so that's quite a lot of data. Is that going to be a problem?
So with Batch Apex, so I'll first run an example of Batch Apex. We can actually traverse the whole set of data. It has much different govern limits than like triggers and other techniques, where you can actually go through the whole table. You can do summaries, and in this case, we're doing some normalization calculations. So if I click on this fix session ratings, behind the scenes in the cloud, we're running a class that does some custom logic that if I go back and refresh this report,
Did we run it?
Well, it did run. So I'm not sure why it didn't run. But again, let's look at the custom logic. So an Apex batch job, in the beginning of it, you basically set up what you want, what records you want to run your custom logic on. So in this first section here, where we're creating this job, this session rating cleanup, we're running a query saying, give me all of the fields from the session rating object. And I'm not providing even a where clause. I'm running it over the whole table. And what happens is as we traverse the table, this execute method will be called on batches of that data. And in this execute method, there's a for loop where I'm applying my logic. And our normalization logic is to look at any score that's less than 5, which is the max, and to add 1 to it. And then after it traverses all that data, it just does a simple update to update the session ratings.
So that's the whole thing?
That's it.
That's pretty amazing. So that's just a very small amount of code that does all of that for me.
Yeah, so I'm not sure why I didn't update our results. But the custom logic, you can do whatever you want. So dedupe, running other call-outs to other systems, all of that type of stuff now you can do in our cloud without having to do some extract, transformation, and import.
Okay. So that's pretty cool. And we did that in Sandbox, right?
That's correct.
So that introduces a whole other challenge, right? How many of you are skilled at promoting code from sandbox into production? A few, right? It's kind of a pain, right? You got to have the IDE installed. Maybe use a tool like Ant to schedule that. Or in many cases, you're probably going to go to IT and have them handle it for you. So that's a very common situation. Please tell me that there's an easier way to do this.
So in the past, there's been partners that have built business-level tools that make it easy to deploy. So Snapshot is a tool that's still very popular. But with Winter 10, we've actually released in a beta something called Cloud Deploy. And it's really meant for end users to be able to point and click, move configuration changes from sandbox to another sandbox or to production.
Okay, so does that mean that I don't need to install this and use this tool to move changes to production?
Well, these tools are great for IT organizations, but with Force.com, we empower a whole nother level of developers. And so for those audience...
I don't have to do that either?
This is user-friendly, isn't it? So you do not have to do this either. But there are use cases for using this type of scripting technology.
All right. Well, I think, we'd like to see that. Let's see, how does this Cloud Deploy work?
So in this section, I'm again in Sandbox. So if you look here, Force.com Sandbox. And under Deploy, there's several new sections that have been added since Winter 10. One of those is a deployment connection. So in production, you can determine what sandboxes can push information to that environment. And if you had multiple sandboxes, you would then, in the one that you want to be able to push information to, you would create a connection. And then you have the concept of outbound change sets and inbound change sets. So outbound change sets are where you want to push configuration from this environment to another. Inbound is the opposite, where you want to retrieve information from the other. So in Sandbox, I've created a change set called Session Rating Cleanser. And if we look at it, once you create it, you can upload it. And in this case, I've already created it and locked it down and got it ready for upload. But if we look at one that I haven't had that, haven't closed it, I can add components just by selecting what type of component it is and then picking what component I want to add to the change set.
So you can move code with this. Can you move other kinds of things too?
You can move code, reports. So if we go back to this add section, any piece of configuration, whether it's a dashboard, a workflow, all of that is available here. Not only can you just pick what you want, but you can also see any dependencies. So if we look at View Add Dependencies, these are dependencies that you can see for any of the components that we're trying to deploy. So I added this event sign-up controller, but we can also see that it's referenced by a couple of other pages, and those also reference a custom field definition in a campaign called an event time. So all of the dependencies are also stuff that you can traverse so that you can know if you're getting everything or if you're only getting part of it.
That's pretty cool.
And then in production, after we lock that down and click the upload, we can go and in production, we would look in the inbound change sets. So here's the inbound change set that's coming from my sandbox called test. And if I want to deploy this, I can hit deploy. And let's see if our works in production. So in production, I also have our report here with the ratings. And we just deployed our code. So let's see if we can now go run the batch Apex that didn't work in my sandbox. And notice here, it is changing the scores. So
it works better in production than it did in test. We like that.
So So, and again, I can do that without having to use IT tools that are very specific to IT. I can also monitor deployments, see dependencies, etc.
So with the combination of what we've seen here, it sounds like I just really need to know HTML and some scripting in order to take advantage of all of this.
Yeah, for the most part, there were some parts that, you know, we went through that was a little bit more complicated, some code and some queries, but we have some great resources. Online help, Developer Force is a great resource, and we even have other offerings where our support organization, for little things, will actually, you know, do some of that work for you without having to do some long statement of work and scoping effort, etc. So it's the app extensions is something that our support group even offers.
So I can do it myself, or I can ask Salesforce to do it for me.
Absolutely,
So
especially
that's pretty good.
especially for the little things like a controller or a registration page or some batch Apex. When it has a very finite scope, this is perfect because you don't have to do the long, you know, SOW and all the other parts.
So I can just go submit a case and say, Salesforce,
Yep.
please do.
Yep.
How about that? Just a little caveat on that, a little safe harbor. Depending upon the level of support you currently purchase, that may involve an additional fee. So just as a fair warning. But that is available to you, and I encourage you, if you have something like that that's small, submit a case. Ask support to help you out. Awesome. So what other resources can we have? So let's talk a little bit about additions, because I know that it's obvious that unlimited, I can do a whole lot. What about if I'm, say, a professional edition customer? How much of what we just saw can a professional edition customer take advantage of?
So Visual Force is supported in all editions. Now, where you have custom logic behind Visual Force, where you have a class or Apex, that's really only an Enterprise Edition or Unlimited Edition.
Okay. And what about that registration page, the sites?
The registration page, because it has some custom logic behind it that was doing dedupe and other checking, that part of it is specific to Enterprise Edition or Unlimited Edition.
Okay. So, but I can do the email template.
The email template.
Professional Edition. Mm-hmm. And I can do other Visual Force pages, custom tabs.
Yeah, of any of the standard objects, you can actually have your own Visual Force pages that show whatever you want to show off a standard object in your own unique user interface.
Okay.
But when you need custom logic to do more than just display, that's really you're going to need Apex.
Okay. And Sandbox as well?
So for any of the editions, you know, if you Sandbox is only something that's in Enterprise Edition and Unlimited Edition, because that's where you really need that is for when you're writing code.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. So what are some other examples of things that we can do with Visual Force, just Visual Force?
So what we didn't show is that oftentimes you want to have an extension of the default user interface, maybe on the account record or the contact record or some custom object record. You want some specific related list in a specific format with specific query logic behind it. That's a common example, inline Visual Force. We didn't really go through that.
So like a mashup.
A mashup is another example. And depending on whether the mashup needs conditional logic, you might just be able to do it just with Visual Force, or if you have to do some conditional logic behind the scenes, you'll need Apex.
Okay. That's helpful. So we've got some other topics up here for questions, but at this point, we'd like to also invite y'all to ask your questions. I know that I've seen some hands pop up through, so we certainly are willing to answer questions. There's a couple of microphones on the back, so y'all feel free to step up to the microphone so that everyone can hear your question, and we'll do our best to answer. Which one?
So the Visual Force page that we showed for registration, it could also have had additional fields. There's a Visual Force tag that allows you to input a file, and so it would be like the upload document. And behind that, you would have some code that inserts that as an attachment related to a case or related to whatever object you're trying to implement. So yeah, you could do that with Visual Force. You do need Apex for that.
Is this on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the batch Apex queued normally, or is it delayed somehow by Salesforce, so it's run at quiet times?
So it doesn't, it's not guaranteed to run immediately. It is queued, and there is a limit on how many you can have queued at one time. I think that was the nature of it. So the question was just, is it queued or does it run directly when you hit it? Yeah. So it is queued, but as you saw when I ran it, it was almost instantaneous because we do have an incredible amount of resources. So if you remember the batch Apex, I had a query at the very beginning that says, give me all the session ratings. The batch Apex actually has a limit of 50 million rows. So it can go through all your session ratings. But other things that it needs to access, the additional objects that as it executes your logic, it needs to query, there is a limit for each batch, which is, I think it's 10,000 records. There's a 10,000 sockle row of related records that you can access as you execute. But those limits are much higher than anything else in our cloud. Yes?
Is it possible to call external APIs from within the platform, or would we need to, like web services APIs from the platform?
Yep. So we didn't cover all the things that you can do with Apex today, but one of the things that you can do is you can take a web service contract or a WSDL, and in Apex you can generate what's called an Apex stub. The stub will have all the logic to automatically call that web service, pass in some parameters, get some results back, and do whatever you want inside your code. Show that back to a user, update a record, etc. So that is definitely something that's possible. Question? I think the question is, can you update profiles? You know what? Can you step to the mic? Sorry.
Especially field level security.
So I don't know if you can migrate profiles, and it probably, even if technically we allow you to, from a best practice, that probably wouldn't be something that you would do. You wouldn't let folks that have access in your test or your dev to change your profile and it accidentally get migrated to production. In production is really where you make profiles.
No. We create new profiles, and we would want to migrate those profiles from test to production. And we have objects with 500 fields, so we'd have to go through each one and set the field level security. So I wanted to figure out if there was a more automated way of doing that.
So I'd have to look to see if the profile is something that you can get migrated. I believe it is. It is in the metadata API, so it is there. But in the environment where you are making changes to the profiles, whatever sandbox that is, that should be something that's restricted to a few users, not to, in general, it's a good practice that security is not something that's in the hands of developers. Questions?
Yes.
So doing a dedupe process in Salesforce is something that you have to analyze, right? Because if you did it with batch Apex, it's not like you're going to bring up things and let a human pick and choose which one is going to be the new one. So you'd have to understand from the business perspective the requirements to see if you could really do it in a batch fashion. Because if it's something that's fuzzy, that the requirements are not straightforward, and you need a user to do it, then batch Apex may still be used, but the actual evaluation of which lead or which contact is going to remain has to be done by a user. So the users may be able to go through and click a checkbox, and then batch Apex would eventually go back and consolidate that lead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Let me go so I got the mic here. Right now, deploying from sandbox to production, we're required to have a certain percentage of the code covered by testing. How does the cloud deploy handle that?
The same requirements exist, and those requirements, are the minimal. So, I get pushback because I work with developers on, hey, I've got to write test code that tests 75%. Well, you actually want that, and you actually should really strive to get 100%, or even so that when you run your tests, you see your requirements being shown in the test log saying requirement 1.1 was just executed, requirement 2.2 was just executed, so that as you develop new stuff, your regression test is already built in. Did I answer your question?
Okay. Got more up front.
So there still will be third-party solutions that provide the value-add parts like the fuzzy logic. You could build stuff, but it's always a choice, right? Do my logic, my fuzzy logic requirements, is it really something that is so specific to me that I should build it? Or is it simple enough to where I should build it versus should I just go buy a solution? So we do anticipate a lot of dedupe solutions, and AppExchange has many. A lot of those solutions will also include Batch Apex as part of their processing. But we're not going to try to build the fuzzy logic because all customers have different fuzzy logic for dedupes.
Okay. Back here?
So I'll take the second question about the IDE. We absolutely do have an IDE. It's Eclipse-based. If you go to developerforce.com/IDE, you'll see installation and a tutorial. Now, front page extensions. So I'm not familiar with front page extensions. If they are not just HTML, more than likely, if there's some type of component or reusable piece of active server pages, stuff like that, we may have a similar component in Visualforce. Visualforce has tons of components. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but more than likely, either somebody's written a sample or we have a component that's very similar.
Yeah, one thing I would point out with regard to Visualforce is that one of the advantages of using that tool is that we build in some cross-browser compatibility into the pages that get rendered so that you don't have to worry about that. And if you've ever written an S-control and coded JavaScript to a particular format, it probably didn't work consistently in each browser that you tried. So one of the nice things about Apex is that it gets the Visualforce is that it gets you around that challenge pretty nicely. So keep that in mind. But in that case, it's probably not going to work with front page because it's going to be more likely compatible with Internet Explorer than it would work with some of the other browsers. In the back. How does the scheduled batch Apex work? So that is actually in like a private beta currently. But my understanding, the safe harbor applies, is that you'll be able to put like a time every 30 minutes, some specific time every night or every day. And it's like a scheduler where you'll be able to schedule it like you do with cron and other type of scheduling applications. Yeah, so there is a limit on how many Apex batch jobs you can have running concurrently. I believe the limit is 10, but the documentation is the ultimate authority. Okay, more questions? Yes?
So the question was, how do you have one page on your website that's really hosted by Visualforce, but keep the rest of the website the same? So there's multiple approaches. You could have a link where it pops open a new browser and it's coming from a force.com or a domain name you've used on sites. Another option is on your web page to have an iframe, and as long as you're using sites and there's no security, there's no authentication, then the user would never know that there's another domain serving part of the information. That's typically how mashups and other things work, where you see Google Maps. So we would be part of the mashup into your site. So those are a couple of approaches, and there's other things you can do as well.
So doing that, then it would appear like it's your website up top, www.yourcompany.com.
Yes. And the other option is just to use sites for like a marketing landing micro site where it's more than just one page. It's multiple pages where you sign up for events and you do other information. And with sites, you can get your own domain name, your own, acme.com, and overlay the force.com URL that we throw up.
Okay. How we doing? Got more questions? More questions? So you allowed as many as you need. You get one with Enterprise Edition. You can purchase extra. You get a whole set of sandboxes with unlimited, so you get a whole bunch more. I think it's somewhere around 15 sandboxes with unlimited. But again, you can always purchase additional sandboxes if you need more. Anybody else? Wow. Oh, we got one more. That's a great question.
So a full copy sandbox makes that easy.
Yeah.
If you want a sandbox where you have like a subset of data that's going to be related, that's not as easy. You can export the data and do like VLOOKUPs and other stuff, but it's still not. It is still a challenging process. Other techniques is to go and just create some data and just clone it. Or, an option now is even to use batch Apex, copy one record and insert, 100 more just like it, and then insert some other related objects. But there's not a perfect answer for what you're describing.
The best answer is to get a full sandbox. And
That's the
what we
easiest.
would recommend is that you would do your initial unit testing in an environment where you could just plug in one or two records and you could see, okay, is that close enough? And then promote the change to a full sandbox where you can do some real robust testing with actual data. That's the best answer we have today. I've always thought it would be great to have some sort of test extract that I could pull just a subset of data out. But you would have to create that. I'm not aware of a partner solution, and we don't have it yet. But that's certainly something that I would encourage you to submit an idea and vote on. There's probably one out there on Idea Exchange. That'd be a great feature to add in the future. Another question?
So authentication of users, any part of our cloud, you can do it in multiple ways. SAML is one way to do single sign-on, where in your enterprise you have a security provider that produces something called a SAML assertion, and the users never know the difference, but we accept that as proof that they've been authenticated by you. Another way of doing it is having the user go and put a username and password into a form, like our login page or another page. And behind the scenes, we call your identity system via a web service call, and you tell us yay or nay whether they got that right. And there's other options. There's something called OAuth that we're looking at for consumer. But that could be an hour session in and of itself.
Single sign-on is a common question about authentication. So, I would recommend that you talk to. We have a couple of partners in the expo who have offerings around single sign-on. We've also got some documentation on the developer site with sample code on how to build something if you wanted to write something yourself that would do that kind of single sign-on, the components that Shannon was just describing.
Yes.
Yep.
So batch apex doesn't happen, during, like, unlike a trigger, applies custom logic as part of the transaction to insert or update something in the database. Batch apex happens outside of that transaction. So you could, as part of data loader, have a trigger that marks records that need to be processed. And then have batch apex come back later and scroll through and in the query go say, give me all the records that need to be processed and do whatever you want to. But they won't happen in the same time frame that the trigger does. They'll be decoupled. But that's good because in the trigger, we're holding locks in a database and holding threads and other stuff that we can't allow you to do a ton of computational work.
Okay. Got a
One
question
more?
back over here?
Do we have time for one more?
We got 8 minutes, and so
Oh, okay.
I mean,
It does. I don't know why it didn't today. Okay, I have used it many times before today's session, but perhaps there was something going on in Sandbox. Yes, it does.
all right.
Yes.
Yes. So that was actually where we're going to go next. Is at the end, after this session, you can go out to the Dreamforce portal. You should have received some information how to find that based on your registration, where you can get an App Exchange package. It's basically just a URL, which you click on, and you can install that in a Developer Edition account or in your Sandbox. You could do it in production. We don't recommend that. Go ahead and download all of the source code that we showed in the demo today.
Do they have to rate the session a specific way to get the code?
Yes, 5 stars. So yeah, and that actually brings up kind of the final. We do ask that you take a minute and give us your feedback. Let us know what you thought of this session, and obviously we're trying to do better, so we're trying to listen to your feedback. So please share with us and fill out that survey for us, and be nice. Be nice, please. Okay. That's it. Thank you all very much. We appreciate it.